For more than 40 years, one of the most prolific violent criminals in American history was never identified. He struck across California, then disappeared, leaving almost nothing behind. He had been trained to leave nothing behind. He had been a police officer. This is the story of how he was finally found, 4 decades later, not by his own DNA, but by the DNA of relatives he had never met. For years, he was not even recognized as a single person. In one region, he was called the East Area Rapist. In another, the original Night Stalker. Only later would investigators realize these were the same man. The offender, a journalist, would eventually name the Golden State Killer. It did not begin with murder. In the small city of Visalia, starting around 1973, a prowler committed scores of break-ins, slipping into homes at night and taking small, strange items. Investigators would later come to believe this was the same man, learning his methods before the violence escalated. From there, it spread across suburban California through the 1970s. Ordinary neighborhoods, quiet streets. He entered homes through unlocked doors and windows, usually at night, and he chose his victims with care, well in advance. From the evidence, investigators built a profile of a careful, methodical offender. He surveilled his targets ahead of time. He sometimes entered homes beforehand, learning the layout. He took deliberate steps to avoid leaving fingerprints or witnesses. Then, for long stretches, he would simply stop and disappear. Across roughly 13 years, the same offender was linked to dozens of assaults and at least 13 murders spread over hundreds of miles of California. The scale and the distance between the crimes helped him hide. For a long time, no one realized they were hunting a single man. He was not untouchable. Over the years, there were near misses. He was chased on foot by residents and by police. On at least occasion, he opened fire to escape. Composite sketches drawn from survivors were circulated widely. Each time, he vanished back into the suburbs, and the trail went cold again. The attacks in Northern California and the murders in the South were, for years, investigated as separate cases by separate agencies. Without a way to connect them, each department was only ever chasing part of the picture. Then, in 2001, DNA testing connected the northern and southern crimes. It was the same man, but there was a problem. His DNA profile matched no one in any criminal database. He had never been caught for anything that required a sample. By now, the case had a name. A crime writer researching the unsolved attacks gave the unknown offender a single identity: the Golden State Killer. But a name was not a face, and the case soon went cold again. This is the limit of traditional DNA evidence. It can only identify someone who is already in a database. The Golden State Killer was not. For another decade and more, his DNA sat in evidence, matching no one on Earth. Then investigators tried something that had never cracked a case like this before. Instead of searching criminal databases, they turned to genealogy. The same hobby millions of people use to trace their own family history. They took the killer's crime scene DNA and uploaded it to a public genealogy website. The kind of site where ordinary people compare their DNA to find long-lost relatives. The site did not find the killer. It found his family. Distant cousins who had uploaded their own DNA, hoping to learn about their ancestors, with no idea what their genetic information would help uncover. From those distant matches, a team of investigators and genealogists built enormous family trees. They worked through generations, connecting branches, narrowing thousands of relatives down toward one family, and then toward one man. The trees pointed to a 72-year-old man living quietly outside Sacramento. A married father, a grandfather, and, decades earlier, a police officer. His name was Joseph James DeAngelo. A genealogical lead is not proof. To be certain, investigators followed DeAngelo and collected DNA he discarded in public, reportedly from his car and from his rubbish. The samples matched the crime scene DNA exactly. Side by side, the case was unmistakable. The sketch, drawn from victims in the 1970s, and the mugshot of the man arrested in 2018. After more than 4 decades, the Golden State Killer finally had a name and a face. Joseph James DeAngelo. There was a bitter irony in it. The man who had been so careful to leave no evidence had once worn a badge. DeAngelo had served as a police officer in California during the 1970s, the very years the attacks were happening. He was fired in 1979 after being caught shoplifting. On April 24, 2018, officers arrested DeAngelo outside his home. He was 72 years old. To his neighbors, he had been an unremarkable older man. For decades, the most wanted offender in California had been hiding in plain sight. In 2020, rather than face trial, DeAngelo pleaded guilty. In a makeshift courtroom, he admitted to 13 murders and acknowledged dozens of rapes, many of which could no longer be charged because too much time had passed. The numbers are difficult to absorb. At least 13 murders, around 50 rapes, more than 100 burglaries, and 40 years of freedom. He was sentenced to multiple life terms with no possibility of parole. For silent years, the case stayed alive because people refused to let it die. Survivors told their stories. Families pressed investigators to keep looking. Researchers and writers kept the unsolved crimes in the public eye. That sustained pressure is part of why the case was still active when the technology finally caught up. For the survivors, and for the victims' families, the answer arrived decades late. The man who had terrorized them had not been a stranger from far away. He had been a neighbor, a familiar face in an ordinary community, the same pattern seen in case after case like this one. What makes this a landmark case is how it ended. He was not caught by his own mistake or his own DNA in a database. He was caught by the DNA of relatives he had never met, who simply wanted to learn about their own families. It was a method that would go on to solve dozens of other cold cases. The arrest of DeAngelo became a turning point for forensic investigation. In the years since, the same approach, investigative genetic genealogy, has been used to identify suspects and victims in dozens of other cold cases that had gone unsolved for decades. A tool built for tracing family history had become one of the most powerful instruments in modern policing. If you found this breakdown useful, consider subscribing. Each episode looks at how one case was actually solved and the single piece of evidence that made the difference. Thanks for watching.